Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of An Unconventional Guide to Success. Scott and I are excited for this season and hope you will truly enjoy our incredible lineup of guests who will share their stories and help us as we continue to explore concepts and discuss real-life examples showing that the path isn't linear and that the journey to success is self-defined. My name is Linda Misegadis.
And I'm Scott Montgomery.
And we will be your guides. Welcome to An Unconventional Guide to Success. I always want to say for success, and Logan always tells me, Mom, it's to success. So spoiler alert, our producer is my son. So but but welcome everybody. Hey Scott, nice to see you.
Hey, nice to see you, Linda, too. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, nice to see you today as well.
Thanks for having me on. And I had to figure there's a family relationship when I got emails from Misegadis. I had to figure it. There aren't a lot of those names out there working on the same podcast.
Very true. Yes, there are not a lot of those names out there, and if you see it, we're probably related. So yeah, definitely one of those names.
Careful what we're saying to other Misegadises.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. Well, we're really excited to be back for season 3. Scott and I have some great guests lined up for everyone, and here today we've got Brian Chidester with us. Brian's the head of public sector marketing at Socure, and he's also the host of his own podcast. The Government Huddle by Brian with Brian Chidester. It's a podcast from GovExec. Formerly, he served as the industry vice president for global public sector at Genesis. He also has held global public sector leadership roles with OpenText, Appian, Monster Worldwide, Aero ECS, and S&P Global. He holds his BS in Communication Studies from Liberty University. He's a board member for the University of South Florida. Is it Muma College? Is that how you say that, Brian?
Muma School of Business, that's right.
Muma School of Business, awesome. And he's also an advisor to the G20 Global Smart Cities Alliance at the World Economic Forum and a member of Forbes Technology Council. So welcome to the studio, Brian. We're happy to have you here.
Like I said, thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad you're starting the season off because you can benchmark and you only get better from here.
No, come on now.
Yeah, no,
we're
I
starting
totally
in hot.
agree.
We're coming in hot.
Absolutely. Well, and I got the opportunity to meet Brian because we both support an organization called Public Sector Network. Scott has as well. WorldGate has also been a sponsor of their events in the past. And, we've had the opportunity. Brian's keynoted that a couple of times, and I've moderated some of the panels. So that's how Brian and I first met. So.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to meet you. We've had some good conversations, and I'm looking forward to the one we'll have today.
Yeah, me too. So we always kind of like to, I always like to start out, Scott may not, but with an icebreaker a little bit just to kind of ease into the show. But if you could hang out with any cartoon character, who would you choose and why that cartoon character?
Oh, that's easy. It'd have to be a member of the Paw Patrol because I would be the coolest person in my family if I got to go say, hey guys, I just met Rubble and we did some construction work together. I mean, my daughter would think I was the best.
That's right? Awesome. That's absolutely. Well, that's funny. I forget you've got little ones, don't you?
Yeah, I have 3 of them. So, I mean, as you were going through my bio, I was going to throw in there, and I'm also, my favorite role is dad to 3 kids, but that's the one that keeps me also the busiest.
Right.
On a regular basis.
Brian, we have that in common. And it's funny because I have 3 kids too, but they're 15 and 17. I have twins that are 15.
Oh, wow.
And I've never heard of the cartoon you're talking about.
Wow. Yeah.
So it must be
Your
newer.
Kids are
Must
a
be
little
newer.
older. Yeah. It's a newer cartoon, but.
If I had to pick, let's say it that way, if I had to pick a cartoon that is outside of my kids' generation, I was always a big fan of G.I. Joe growing up. I feel like that would be a cool one. But I still remember this. This was an old cartoon. I'm really dating myself now. There was a young James Bond cartoon on before school. And I always thought he was the coolest because this is like a high school age kid going on these secret missions, secret adventures like James Bond. And for me, if I could do a ride along on one of those, that would be pretty fun.
That's awesome. No, I like that.
Don't look up the date of that cartoon, guys.
Don't look up the date.
Brian, let me tell you something. Linda and I have you beat on that because we're talking Flintstones and Jetsons.
Yeah, exactly.
We're way back.
Oh, yeah.
Yesterday was Mr. Rogers' last day on air. Speaking of kids' stories and kid TV shows, 22 years ago was his last day on air yesterday.
And I used to watch him. So, just to give you guys, I just turned 40. on the
Okay.
13th. Just had that milestone. So that's where I'm
Congratulations.
sitting.
That's
Welcome.
yeah. Happy
Welcome.
birthday! I forgot you did just
Yeah.
celebrate a birthday.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah.
No,
That's
that's
awesome.
fantastic. What about you, Scott? I mean, what cartoon character would you hang out with?
I like the Incredible Hulk. I like the
Oh, all
Incredible Hulk
right.
a
All
lot.
right.
I think it's great that
Yeah.
you can actually manifest yourself into something that, like, you know, is different than the way you are. And we're constantly morphing and evolving. So I always love the Incredible Hulk.
Oh, I like that.
And
I'm kind of
actually,
a Pinky in the Brain person myself.
Oh,
Like,
watch out for Linda. She's gonna try to take over the
yeah,
world.
I
that's right.
am. Yeah, exactly. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So it's funny. We got G.I. Joe and the Incredible Hulk, and then we have cerebral, intelligent, going to take over the world.
Right.
We're just going to push our weight around. G.I. Joe and
exactly.
the Incredible
We got
Hulk,
an interesting cast of characters here, don't we? Yeah.
And then you have the Paw Patrol that's going to come in and clean everything up.
That's
so we got everything
exactly.
well-rounded. Yeah.
Who is this rebel character? Right.
Oh, see, I'm not going to spoil it for you, Scott.
All right.
You got to go watch
now
it.
you're going to go have to do your research. That's it. Exactly.
I'm in.
I love
I'm
it.
in.
That's great. Oh my goodness.
That's great.
Well, Brian, I know in your world, you focus a lot on in the federal space. So why did you choose that path? Like, what made you kind of head down the route of government, and why specifically federal? Because there, you could go both ways, and state and locals definitely different than the federal market. So why
Well,
that
so
area?
I actually do focus on state and local as well. So
Oh, all right, good to know.
yeah, so I would actually say in my role right now, there's probably more of an emphasis on the
Okay.
state level governments, especially
Okay.
as we deal with. So as Linda mentioned, I'm the head of our public sector marketing team at Socure, and we do digital identity verification. Think when you're going in to do payments to government or get disbursements from government, making sure you're verifying and saying of all those Misegadis we talk about that are out there, you
Yeah.
are Linda Misegadis. You are the Linda Misegadis that's trying to represent herself to get those disbursements. And the reason why I say that is there's a lot of that happening at the state level, right? A lot of programs
That's
that are
true.
supporting
Yeah.
citizens. So we have a lot of state level government relationships that we build, but also federal too. There's obviously a lot of citizen facing programs. I mean,
Sure.
the middle of April, right? I mean, we go in and pay our taxes. That's a huge
Yeah.
one. But there's a lot of programs. But even beyond that, I've had global roles in the past where I've dealt with various levels of government all over the world. One of the coolest projects I worked on was with the government of Qatar, doing a full digital transformation project on their customer experience or citizen experience platform
Wow.
in the run up to the FIFA World Cup that just happened there.
Wow.
So
Okay.
they were going to have a massive ingestion, obviously, of tourism,
Yeah.
visas, all of that, and we supported that program for them. Which I'm a huge soccer guy, so I
Okay.
thought it was incredibly cool. But yeah, so it's been domestic, it's been international at all levels of government. And to get to the spirit of your question, which was kind of how I got here.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I was excited to have this conversation, because all the guests that I bring onto my show, when we get into their careers, I hear this all the time. My path to this job or this role was not a straight line. It wasn't linear, just like your tagline is.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be further from,
Wow.
or that couldn't be closer to the truth than for
Sure.
me. I went to college and I played soccer, and that's what I focused on. I played Division I soccer. I actually played a year professionally. And when I got to school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to be, but I started doing marketing classes, and I just fell in love with communication
Yeah.
and engaging people and finding creative ways to get people to take action. So much so that I was staying late after class, working on projects longer than I should have, telling my coach I'm going to be late to
Oh,
practice.
wow.
So when I finally had a chance to start my career, I live in the DC area. I always say you're either working for the government or doing business with the government.
Yeah.
So I found a role in public sector marketing, and the reason why I stayed is what I've really found is one, and you can attest to this, Linda, especially the community is incredible. I love working
Yeah.
with the people in this community. So many people that have helped me along the way, mentored me,
Yeah.
but also too, it's not something that everyone can do, and I'm
Yeah.
incredibly competitive. And you get into the business of government space, anybody who's done that before understands the challenges and nuances that go into a role that engages government, and knowing that it's something that not everyone can do. And because I'm so competitive, I haven't left. It's just I love it. I'm
Amazing.
not the person that I mentioned I have 3 kids, so I'm not doing as much work on the weekends these days, but
You're doing
on
more on the
Sunday nights,
weekends. Let's give
that's
Brian, give
true.
yourself a little bit of credit. You're doing a lot
That's
more on the
true.
weekends than before.
Yeah, that's true.
But on Sunday night, I've never been the guy that said, "Oh, I don't want to go to work on Monday." I'm
Yeah.
opening up my laptop when the kids go to bed, and I'm getting ready for the week because I can't wait to dive in. And that hasn't changed, and I absolutely love it.
That's
I want to
fantastic.
jump on something you just said, Brian, that I absolutely love, that I found really prominent in my career as well. And you said that is the people that you work with, right?
Mhm.
The reason you get up in the morning, and the teams that you're building, the teams that you're part of, and the mission-based work that you plug
Yep.
into is so important for the next generation and for people graduating college. It's so often that I hear in the college vortex, of which I just graduated college, 35 years in the making.
Just.
Those students, I know, students tend to think that they're bringing a skill out into the real world, and where do they plug that skill in? And I have found it's often those people that you interact with and those teams that you build. And in what I've written about and what I've experienced in my book and what I've experienced in life, I found relationships to be key. I would
Mhm.
love if you would just dive in for the sake of our audience, and helping them understand that those partnerships, those long lasting relationships, that mission based work that you've plugged into that took you away from your hobby a little bit, but really
Yeah.
satiated you. Who do you have in your world, and how did all that start for you? And is there
Yeah.
one specific person or two that really guide you to this day, maybe?
100%. And real quick before I answer that question, you talked about purpose. And I've been doing a lot of reading recently, and I haven't gotten to your book, Scott, but I will. But I just, there was a quote in this book that said, "Suffering ceases to be suffering when you find a purpose."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're
Yeah.
working really hard and it seems so
Right.
difficult, all of that goes away when you have a purpose that you're driving towards, because your
Yeah.
mission is what is central. You're not focused on how much it hurts or how hard it is or how big the mountain is. You just, and it's the other thing, the other part of that too is as I've gone, I've learned it's not about the end goal as much as
Yeah.
it is falling in love with the process.
I
And if you
agree.
fall in love with the process, then you're never gonna stop, no matter how hard it
Fantastic.
is. I actually learned that from running. I'm a huge runner, and knowing that every single day I'm gonna wake up and it's gonna be the same run, but falling in love with the process of getting faster and getting better, that's really what you have to do. It's not about that end time at a race that you might do. It's about all the runs you did leading up to that and all the runs you're gonna do after.
My
Yeah.
So
gosh.
it's
Beautiful.
falling in love with the process is so important. But you talked about people, and then there's absolutely a few people that I can think of, and I'm almost hesitant to start naming people because there's so
Sure.
many.
Right.
Right.
One of the
Stories.
things I will say though is I am a firm believer, and anybody that I've mentored, I've made sure that they knew this, that just because you might have a formal mentor mentee relationship
Mhm.
Mhm.
doesn't change the fact that you're going to have mentors all your life that aren't formalized. And I've made sure that I'm constantly looking around, and I feel like I've learned more from just watching people that might not even know
Yeah.
I was watching
Right.
than the people that I've actually had a one-to-one relationship with.
Hmm.
If I had to put my finger on the one person that I think he wasn't even and probably fits right in this bucket, wasn't even really a quote unquote mentor, but changed the trajectory of my career dramatically, was a guy named Jason Adolph who works at Appian. And when
Okay.
I was at Appian, I was solely focused on marketing.
Hmm.
And what I learned there from him is how powerful of an instrument you can make yourself when you have such a incredible depth of knowledge within the
Mhm.
market, within the
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
It's not just about, and this is the thing that you sort of feel coming out of college perhaps, and again, I'm long removed too, but you feel, and I had this thought that it's all marketing. It doesn't matter what you're marketing. It's
Yeah.
all just the same type of rinse and repeat, and that is not true.
Mhm.
Anybody listening, that's doing marketing or getting into your career, that is not true. Um, and especially in the government space, everything is
Yeah.
so nuanced. But what he did for me was he made me realize that I needed to get deeper and smarter on the market that I'm in. Um, and I very much took that to heart. So I was I mean, he's one of the reasons why I start my mornings every morning. I'm up usually around 4 a.m., but I start my mornings reading. If
That's
anybody
awesome.
who follows me on LinkedIn or Twitter will see articles that I'm sharing, it's because I'm starting it and I'm trying to learn and
Yeah.
get deeper and better and try to form my own opinions on different things
Wonderful.
happening too. But I want to be able to not have to rely on people around me to go out and propagate whatever it is we're trying to talk about or be subject matter experts. I should be able to do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and have a more strategic lens into the industry, not just marketing strategy. So he helped me pivot my
That's
career, and
wonderful.
from that role, I moved into my role at OpenText, where I was head of worldwide industry strategy for public sector, traveling around the world, speaking at events, working with government leaders on how they need to build out their programs, and all of that. So it's made me almost re-fall in love with this industry more and more.
Yeah.
And I owe that to him for
It's
sure.
wonderful.
Yeah, that's
Wonderful.
really cool. I love
Such
that. Well, and I'm just kind of curious a little bit. As a leader, how do you see your role then as kind of like that mentor, advisor, coach? In the roles that you've had and the positions that you're in. If you kind of reverse that a little bit, how do you see yourself?
I think about that often. I mean, I have some formalized people that I do mentor. I have mentored, especially through Government Marketing University, where they actually have a mentor protege program
Oh,
that I've
wonderful.
done for about 3 or 4 years now. Um, so I very much try to think about what I'm leaving behind, especially the things that I've learned. And part of it is that pass it forward type of approach, right? I've had so many people. I mentioned Jason. There's so many others out there that have helped me that I want to make sure that I'm able to leave behind, even if it's a little piece, or even if I'm only helping one person. I want
yeah.
to know that I was able to do that. So that's one of the reasons why I like to volunteer. The other the other reason too is I always learn things from them,
Yeah.
right? I
Yep,
always
me
learn
too.
things from them. It could be tactical, like social media strategy or things of that nature that are a little bit newer on some of the things that I might not know about. But there's also ways they interact, like finding what drives them.
Mhm.
Things that obviously change generation through generations, and learning how to interact with those makes me a better leader in my own organization. Right? How
Yeah.
do I interact with the people that are similar in age? Making sure that I'm speaking to them. I'm really kind of touching on their purpose and what is driving them. So I always learn from them throughout that process.
Oh,
That's
I love that.
fantastic.
I was talking with Larice Brown. You probably have met Larice before
Mhm.
at one of the events, and she's just such a smart woman, and I really enjoyed talking with her. But she said something to me that really resonated because I have a tendency sometimes to ruminate a little bit in the past, like, well, this is the way it used to be, and she likes to remind me frequently that times have changed. We're in a different environment, a different world, and so you have to look at things through the lens of today, because we do have a bad habit, especially the older we get, in wanting to kind of look back here and think, oh, well, this is the way it used to be. And Scott and I have even talked about this, about holding younger people to standards that don't apply to them today. It's a different
Right.
world, it's a different environment, and how you approach things is not how we came up, and probably not even how you came up either, Brian.
Yeah.
It's different. And I think that was an important lesson I took away from that.
Well, I think it's really important
One of
what
the
Brian
things.
what Brian you just said too about how your mentors teach you and keep you fresh
Mhm.
with that
Yeah.
same logic is a huge piece of this because we do have to be malleable with each other as we're
Yep.
continuously learning and growing. Yeah, you were going to say something.
And all relations are bidirectional. What I was going to say is one of the questions that I often get asked, and when I have conversations with folks, especially in this type of relationship, generally there's strategic conversations and there's tactical. They'll
Yeah.
come to me and they'll say, "I'm thinking about this across my career." or they'll come to me and say, "Hey, I'm having this issue with this coworker. I'm working on this project, and how do I?" So I like having a little bit of both. But one of the questions that I often get, almost in every single type of relationship that I've had like this, is around a job that they're in a role, they want to move to a different role, and they want to know how. And one of the pieces of advice that I generally give them is very similar to kind of what you're talking about, Linda. But if you kind of fold that into their way of thinking, they worry that they're not qualified enough, or
Yeah.
if they are qualified, that they're not old enough to fit
Yeah.
into that mold.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I tell them is so much has changed over the past 10, 15, 20 years that you may be just as qualified or even more so than somebody who's 40 or 50
Yeah.
because you are a native to these things.
Yeah.
And don't forget to lean on that type of experience because it can really differentiate you throughout that process. You might be just as qualified as they are, if not more so. Age doesn't play a part in it. It's all about what you can
Yeah.
bring to the organization, and make sure when you're talking to them, you're selling the fact that you are natively in these things. So just something to think about if anybody's out there, they're thinking, "Hey, you know what? I need to fit into this mold to get this job." No, you just need to
Yeah.
be you.
I love
Bring
that.
your skill sets into those roles and you'll compete against anybody.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's great advice. And I think especially today as we hear so much conversation around things like imposter syndrome
Hmm.
and trying to fit in. And as, just to your point, and particularly in an industry like government that is still very rooted in the older generation. I think it's one of
Mhm.
the only workforces that actually has every single generation is still works in it. So it's true
Hmm.
Yeah.
multi-generational environment, which can be challenging sometimes if you're a young person trying to think about how you break into an environment like that. And I love what you just said, because you're right. The world we live in today is really representative of where they are today, not where we
Yeah.
were 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, and
So
it was so
Correct.
conventional back then, and the way the path is
yeah.
today being unconventional. And there's so many executives that I work with and interact with at my firm here at Worldgate that are so feeling like they have imposter syndrome because they fell into the
Yes.
job
Yeah.
when really the leadership that they were reporting into saw their value, to you said, as being native to what the next level is, right? And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
because they didn't actually do it a way that they had envisioned of the past, they called it unconventional, which means imposter.
Mhm.
And it really doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much now more about getting into careers and changing and shifting by through osmosis and immersion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And every new role should be uncomfortable,
Right.
Yes.
right? That's something that I think they don't tell you when you start your
Right.
career. You think
Right.
if it's not it's if you
It's
think about
hard.
it, the yeah,
Yeah.
and the analogy that I often use is when if you're I mean, if you're unlike some of the teams that I follow, like the Washington Commanders, you most good teams pay players for what they're going to do, not
Right.
for what
Good
they've already
point.
done.
Yeah.
They've given some of that, right?
Hmm.
But they're projecting into the future. So if they're getting these massive contracts, they're not paying you for what you've already done. They're paying you for what you're going to bring to this next role they're going to slot you into.
Hmm.
And that's
Really
with that
good.
comes a level of discomfort, right?
Yeah.
Because you have something to live up to, but there's also you're only going to get better. And that's what's so good about um being uncomfortable is you
Yeah.
have to be uncomfortable to get better. There's a great book that I'm blanking on the author's name now, but it's called Deliberate Discomfort. It's by a former Army Ranger, and he goes through
Oh,
and he tells different stories from his career, and obviously the underlying piece of it is you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and if you can
right.
do that, it's going to bring it's and you pair that with a growth mindset, the
Yeah.
sky's the limit. So
Well,
Yeah.
you should be seeking out opportunities to be uncomfortable. You shouldn't stay in your own zone.
Yeah.
I love the
Totally
analogy
agree.
you talk about how well, and so many young entrepreneurs and folks emerging into their career or people changing their career. I love what you just said. It's the first time I ever
Yeah.
heard it in a way of looking at the Commanders and saying you've been slotted for what's to be,
Yeah.
Mhm.
not you've been validated for what you've been through. Those are two
Yep.
very, and I love that because that's so important to absolve yourself of anything other than all these progressive behaviors like continual
Mhm.
mindset, growth mindset rather, and
Yep.
sort of validating what you've been through and how it's recognized that that could actually be the skills you need to traject into the future is
Yeah.
Yep.
so important to hear and resonate in for a minute together here, because I think that's where people get hung up a little bit on task and imposter syndrome versus potential and continual learning. Love
Yeah.
that analogy. They're paying you for
Yeah.
what's to be,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
you've earned the position through willingness to immerse yourself into it, through being native to it from where you've been, not
Mhm.
Right.
only
Yep.
because of where you've been.
Yeah,
That's a really nice thing to highlight.
I agree.
and if I can throw another kind of again, I pretty much live in sports analogies, so you'll probably get a few more of these on the show. But one of the anybody who's been an athlete or played a sport can probably relate to that feeling of being in the zone, right?
Yep.
Or they'll call it flow.
Hmm.
And really what that is, if you break it down, it is taking all of your experience, all of the work that you have put in, it's removing the part that gets in your way, which is
Yep.
the overthinking in your brain, and it's allowing all of that to manifest itself
Yep.
in that theater of sport,
Yeah.
right? So that's that same type of situation can happen in a workplace. Bring that experience. And I've had those feelings in the workplace. It
Yeah.
absolutely happened. You can be sitting there working on, you can be in front of your laptop working alone on a strategy, and you're just pulling from things,
Yeah.
jotting it down. You're not even sure where it comes from. I often think when I'll come back to it the next day and think, man, would I have come up with this today? And
Right.
I'm so
Right.
happy that I was working on it yesterday. And but those things can absolutely be part of your professional workspace. It's just leaning on
Yeah.
those experiences. They will just naturally come out when you're in the right environment to do that. You just have to get that piece. It's
Yeah.
it's it's an ironic kind of dichotomy. Get your
Yeah.
brain out of the way and just allow your experience and your talents and all of that to come through.
You're hitting
No,
on
I
all
love that.
cylinders, Brian. I mean, you're hitting on all
Yeah. No,
cylinders.
for sure.
I love the theme of that, and your analogies are fantastic. Your anecdotes, your stories, yeah.
Hey, Brian, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, like what would that advice be?
Man, she's hitting the hard ones, right? Um, that's a good question. I think I have you asked a question before about kind of what I've taken maybe from other people. I
Yeah.
would say the person that I have learned the most from in my entire life is my 9-year-old.
Hmm.
And that is because I tend to index very robotic.
Okay. Sure.
Incredibly robotic. I like to keep my world very black and white,
Yeah.
and he is someone that is so in tune with his emotions. And for me, for a very long time, emotions made me uncomfortable.
Mhm.
I looked at it and said, "You know what? Emotions just get in the way, right?
Yep.
Every good decision needs to just be made cognitively without emotion, remove it completely, and move forward." And the depth in which he can kind of touch into his emotions has taught me so much about how to one and how to engage him and kids,
Yeah.
but two, how to engage other people. It's not something that 18-year-old Brian, honestly, it's not something that maybe 25, 30-year-old Brian was thinking, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I feel like it's something I could have used in those periods of time. No, I don't want to. I also don't want to isolate the fact that I think me indexing robotic certainly helps in
For
ways,
sure.
right? It's
Yeah.
Sure.
it's
I agree.
absolutely it's very. I mean, we talked about being uncomfortable. It's very easy for me to embrace discomfort in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
physically, mentally,
Yep.
emotionally. It's very easy for me to get myself into those situations and be fine. But what he kind of opened up for me is that it's not about you, it's
Yeah.
also about the people around you in those
Yeah.
situations. So to give you an example, a hypothetical example, you could be in a situation where there's chaos everywhere, and I thrive in those situations. I love them. It's everything slows down for me in those moments. We talked about flow, that I can see things so clearly in those moments
Yeah.
that it's very easy for me to make decisions. We talked about just leveraging your experience, all of that.
Right.
What I never thought about was, how is this impacting the people around me?
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
and the reason why that's important, and there's some people that might be listening that might say, "Yeah, but why does that matter? If you're making the decisions and you're moving forward, why does that matter?" Well, because you're gonna have to rely on those people at some point
Yeah.
throughout the process, and they need to be bolstered, enabled to make sure that
Aligned.
they're not left behind,
Yeah.
aligned,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and understand. I'm a big believer in diversity of thought, diversity of value. They're gonna bring something to the equation that you didn't see, whether
Mhm.
you like it or not. I might not have liked to hear that 15, 20 years ago,
Yeah.
but it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that you're allowing for those types of individuals to feel what they're feeling, and kind of help in that situation in the same way.
No.
So he's taught me that immensely.
I
And I
Wow.
love
think
that.
if I could give him some advice, it would be, touch into those pieces of yourself,
Keep
because
them.
it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, keep them
Yeah.
and keep them
Yeah.
active. That's
No, I
Yeah.
really
love that.
impressive, Brian, and that's a lot of growth for you in the last 9 years, I'm sure. That's a lot of
Yeah.
Oh
growth.
yeah.
I
No,
love
Oh
that
for
you're
yeah.
willing to
sure.
share it with our viewers and our listeners, because that's why we're doing this, is so that people
Yeah.
Hmm.
touch in on those important data points around, and they're all so interconnected, right? The imposter
Yeah.
Yeah.
syndrome, emotion, black and white thinking,
Hmm.
rigor, all the stuff.
Yeah.
I will,
Hmm.
if I may, switch gears just a little bit on the notion of your black and white. And all I could think of
Yep.
is, I tend to also pivot to black and white. It's this way,
Yep.
or I'm completely off the reservation crying in my pool of woe. Right. So
Uh-huh.
Linda's got her hands full with me. There's no doubt about it. Because I'm in touch with my
So
emotion
I'm like
and I'm
I'm
right.
calm
Yeah.
and steady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm not quite as all over the
yeah.
place. I'm a little more
She's keeping the
just
train on the
there. Yeah.
tracks.
Keeping the train on the
Yeah.
tracks. Exactly.
Anyway, to
Yeah.
that end, one of the things that I have found very comforting for myself is a routine. You said rinse and lather
Hmm.
a few minutes ago. I've referenced that analogy in the book a few times: rinse, lather, repeat.
Yep.
And just moving us into some of the things that you might set up for yourself as structure. I'm curious what your habits are that maybe drive
Hmm.
you to peak performance. I heard you mention getting up at 4, reading. I heard you
Yeah.
running. And I just kind of wanted to
Hmm.
package that a little bit and say,
Yeah.
what are the things that Brian does that someone else might hear as value to
Hmm.
a little bit of structure, a little bit of black and white helps you recognize the color of your day? What is it
Yeah.
Yes.
you like to pull out of that question? That's sort of
It's
an indirect one. Yeah.
that's more of a loaded question, actually,
Yeah.
than you probably even realized. I mean, first of all, I'll say, from that black and white nature, I thrive in routine. I can operate in chaos, and I'm
Same.
really good at it, but I thrive in routine.
Mm.
I Vacation stresses me out. We're getting ready to go on vacation next week, 4th of July weekend, or 4th of July week, and it's stressful to know that I'm not going to be working on the projects that I have going on and
Right?
keeping that same routine and structure. It sounds insane, but it's absolutely stressful. My wife thinks it's hilarious. Um,
It's a
but the
curse.
reason
I'm
why I
with
said
you
it,
on that, Brian. That's a
yeah,
curse.
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, we talked about how difficult it is. I've had to really focus on being present, especially
Yeah.
for my kids, and enjoying this
Yeah.
time, because while I like the structure, they don't need the structure, and they just need to be kids. And I
Yeah.
know, I mean, I have 9, 4, and 1, and they're
Wow.
not going to be
Wow.
those ages forever.
No.
And they all bring different stresses and different joys at the exact same time in these
Yeah.
ages. And it's changes so fast. So I'm trying to be more present in those things. Um, that kind of helps me pop out of it. But in terms of routine, the reason why I said it's a loaded question is, I went through some health issues recently,
Okay.
and about a year ago, almost a year ago to the day, it was June 23rd. I still remember this. I got the final diagnosis that I had pulmonary embolisms in my lungs,
Oh
Wow.
my
and
gosh.
what had happened the year and a half prior to that was, I was running every day. You talked about routine. I was up at 4 a.m. every day. I was going for a 5 or 6 mile run. I was coming back to my computer. I started work,
Mm.
and that was every single day, and I
Mm.
thrived in that type of routine. And running was something that grounded me. I wasn't the person that ran to music or
Wow.
anything. I just ran with thoughts, and it's one of the
Wow.
things that I've learned recently that it's very difficult for people to do, and I think it's made me more resilient. It's just being alone with yourself in your thoughts
Hmm.
is so
Yeah.
important, and it's challenging. People find it really, really difficult, and I got used to it, and I enjoyed it because it helped me work through things. So
Hmm.
I was ready to hit the ground running, whether it was a personal thing or a professional thing. It didn't matter. I work it all out. Um, so anyway, that got, I mean, overnight taken from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was really difficult. On top of that, the ambiguity of, well, what is this thing happening to me? Because I went
Yeah.
from
Right.
running one day to the next day, I couldn't run 100 yards without just almost passing out, gasping
Right.
for air,
Interesting.
couldn't do it.
Wow.
Now this is something else I've learned throughout this process was while I was waiting, trying to figure out what it was, I was still running. So I was
Mm.
still walking, and I look back on it now and I say, "You know what? You needed to take care of yourself in those
Yes.
situations and listen to your body." And that's something that I've learned with age, and I should have listened to my wife earlier.
Yep.
But I talked about how I can embrace discomfort. I found a way to move through 5 miles every single day in that scenario,
Yeah.
where most people would have thought that's insane. It's just what I did. And when I finally got the diagnosis, because I went through a battery of tests and they were
Mm.
looking at everything, um, it was actually very easy for me to shut down running overnight to say, okay, this is bigger than me. This is this is
Yeah.
for my family. This is me taking care of myself.
Yeah.
But how do I replace that routine?
Right.
Right.
And because I still need it, I still need something to help me get my
Hmm.
brain in the right mindset because I know I can be challenging to be around for anyone if I haven't had those types of things.
Yeah.
But some people wake up and they need a cup of coffee and some time. I needed a run. I didn't
Yeah.
need coffee. I didn't need anything. I needed a run and I needed to work through my thoughts.
Yeah.
And so I was figuring that out. And what I've been doing over the past year is twofold. One, getting up and walking, right? So I cover about 2.5 miles walking every single day. I don't miss a day. But two, I've been plowing through audibles and just
Okay. Yeah.
listening to some of the best books out there and some of the best
Wonderful.
advice that I've gotten from books. Everything from self help books to leadership books into one that was surprisingly probably the best book that I've listened to, which is Matthew McConaughey's Green Light.
Oh,
Oh, I was
really?
Oh my
wondering.
Yeah.
goodness.
I've been on the
It
fence because I love
was
Matthew, but I've been on the
it
fence about he's
was
a little weird. So,
incredible. Um,
He's a
so
little weird.
it's Oh, and he'll only seem weirder after the book,
yeah.
but his story and how he actually pulls that into lessons that he learns
Yeah.
Yeah.
is it's one of the best books that I've gone through. But all
Interesting.
that to say, I think everybody needs. I mean, my wife's very different. My wife likes to work out, but she needs her cup of coffee and she needs some time to decompress in the morning.
Yeah.
I think I drive her nuts sometimes because I've been up already and I'm just roaring to go and ready to go, and
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
she's probably like, "Just I need you to simmer down a little bit." But I think it's important to know that everybody needs something.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's just everybody's different,
Well, I think that's the
and
key. And that's the key right there
yeah,
that I think I was trying to address and sort of point out
you got to
for our.
prioritize it.
Yeah, and
Yes.
you
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to do it. Yeah, exactly right. And
Hmm.
I heard in your processing of your action of running is actually a really good meditation for someone else who
Yep.
might not need the
Yeah.
physical attribute. The rinse, lather,
Correct.
repeat aspect of getting up at 4, reading your book, doing your journaling, doing the things. It's exactly what I talk about in my book around habits really create the ability for you to start to work in a peak performance. And peak performance for our conversation not only includes black and white, but the color of your day, and being able to
Mhm.
Hmm.
recognize and merge both of those things together. It's
Yeah.
really nice of you to share that perspective in that, because I'm finding that to be a theme in all successful people. And a lot of
Yeah.
that gets missed if it's not communicated. It just sort of
Hmm.
Hmm.
either happens through tragedy or diagnosis before people realize they
Yeah.
could actually do it and run a little more structured as they kick
Yeah.
off their day, you know?
Well, and something you threw out there, and I've heard this from so many people, and I'm only saying this because it shows you that everybody's different,
Yeah.
and journaling has become really popular,
Yeah.
and people love to do it, and they love to sit down and get their thoughts out, and everyone that I've heard from that does it finds it to be so therapeutic. it's not something I can do,
Yeah, me
because
neither.
what I do is I sit down. I've tried it a couple times, and I just feel the pressure, and I
Mhm.
don't know what to write.
Yeah.
And with that pressure comes anxiety, and
Yep,
that's missing the point completely,
Yeah.
right?
totally.
But
Right.
it's an incredible tool for somebody to work through their thoughts
Yeah,
and to
Yes.
document what they're feeling. And so it's a great example of somebody's running is somebody else's journaling is
yeah,
somebody else's
A-
something else.
And you use those
And
words,
exactly.
and processing your thoughts is what it's
yeah,
about. And the
Yeah.
exactly.
routine of peak performance is what it's about. And these are my experiences too.
Well, Brian, I have really enjoyed visiting with you today. We like to end the show with three questions.
Oh
So
no.
if you'll indulge us in that,
Let's do it.
yeah. So, what is a common myth about your job or field of expertise? You kind of touched a little bit on this
That
idea that
everyone can do
marketing,
it.
yeah, that everyone,
Yeah.
yeah,
That everyone can
exactly,
do it.
yeah.
Everybody thinks they're a marketer because they can come up with some catchy slogan,
Mm-hmm.
or they think, "Hey, if I just get these advertisements here, it's gonna solve things." I This is another thing I tell marketers, especially in the public sector arena, because you have so many people that are just looking at metrics and how many leads did I get, right? I'm
Yeah,
just trying to get thousands and thousands of leads, and if I get them in, that's my job.
right.
I flip that on its head completely.
Yeah.
My job is to create meaningful one-to-one interactions.
I like that.
If I can get the right person in front of the right person at the right time, then I've done my job. It's
Yeah,
not if I've gotten 10,000 leads, if I've gotten that one right lead and
yeah,
Fantastic.
working to get that, that is my job.
I like that.
But for me, it's that everybody can do it.
Yeah, that's a really good one because you're right. I think that is one of those, and I'll admit I was guilty of that myself until I really started thinking about it from the government side of thinking, well, how hard
Mhm.
is marketing? Well, it's pretty dang hard. So,
Yeah.
and it isn't something; it's a skill for sure that it takes to do that. So, I love that. That's a
I
great
think
one.
I think there's an additional reminder on that that's nice in our day of social media that I just came across the other day. As I'm
Yeah,
marketing the book, I'm marketing my business, and I'm trying to keep a journal of my kids and all these different social media platforms that we have going on. One somebody relatively famous, and I know it relates to the Justin Bieber story too, but you just never know who's watching, right? And
Mhm.
yeah,
all it takes
yeah.
is one, and your message to be clear and concise. So I
Hmm.
like the idea, Brian, that you're bringing that down to an organic sort of 1-to-1 ratio versus I've got
Mhm.
more followers, so I'm a bigger entity. It doesn't
Yeah,
really
Correct.
matter, you know?
Yep.
yep.
And I,
If it's the right followers. Yeah,
No, it's
so
very
really
true.
absolutely.
important,
No.
really important for people to hear and to resonate with. And I think it does touch on your number three here, Linda, which is one thing about your job or field or expertise that almost no one agrees with you about. Might be
Yeah. So
this.
what is the yeah? So yeah, talk about that, Brian. That's what's one thing about your job or field of expertise that almost no one agrees with you about when you talk about it?
Huh, that's interesting. I don't know if there's an overarching thing that nobody agrees with me on. I think if there are disagreements, it's probably more tactical or
Okay.
more specific.
Yeah.
And I also I attribute that actually to less about me and more of the people that are around me.
Yeah.
I have some, especially at SoCure, Matt Thompson, Jordan Burris. I mean, we have some great leaders in that organization. Matt is a former special operations commander in the Army Ranger. Was under General McChrystal. People like to say that they'll ask him questions about his book Team of Teams, and he says, "Yeah, I lived it." And the book came after.
Yeah.
But incredible leadership. And Jordan's the same. He's the former chief of staff for the federal CIO at OMB.
Uh huh.
You talk about somebody who is so good, so thoughtful
Yeah.
about what he's saying, but also so empathetic. He's so good at his job at the same time, cares about everybody around him. But it's a long way of saying I'm surrounded by so many great people that they also know that they hired me because of my background and
Yeah.
my expertise. And it's not that they need to get out of the way, but they trust me to build things.
Yep.
And I will do refinements and tweaks, but there's rarely any big disagreements. There's a lot of trust within our organization.
Yeah.
And that's one of the going back to what we talked about in looking for roles and finding roles, that's the type of environment I look for too. I mean, we
Right.
often say that interviews are bi-directional,
Yep.
right? So
Yeah.
you need to be finding an environment that you can land in and thrive in. that's one of the big things that I prioritize. I prioritize work-life balance. I think that's incredibly important because I have 3 kids, and it's
Yeah.
because I want to spend time with my 3 kids. I can tell you about a funny story about that later. And 2, trust, right?
Yeah.
You want to trust the leaders, and you want them to trust you.
Yeah.
So those are a couple things I prioritize, but because of that, I don't really have situations where these overarching disagreements on big things.
No, I like that. I
Good.
think that's
Yeah.
good. Well, and my last question kind of ties a little bit back to a couple nuggets you were just sharing with us, but is like, what is the most important lesson that you've learned over your career?
Um, for me, it's alignment or identity. And what I mean by that is it's you have to know who you are, and it makes
Yeah.
everything else so easy, right? If we
Yeah. Yeah.
talked Scott, you talked earlier about being black and white. There's a lot of cons to that, but there's a lot of pros. My black and white
Yeah.
pro is that I know what my priorities are, and it's very easy for me to say no when I know that is in
Yeah.
direct conflict with my priorities. I was
Yep.
at an event.
Yeah.
This is actually what I was alluding to. I was at an event a couple weeks ago. It was a networking event, and I'm standing around talking to a bunch of executives, right? Trying to network and do these things. And a woman came in. She brought up a great idea. It'd be fun is if we could bring our kid to kind of show them what we do. And I always get questions. And one of the guys said, "Well, I come here to get away from my kids."
Huh.
And
Interesting.
it was in that moment, I looked at my watch and I said, "These aren't my people. I gotta
Yeah.
go."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? You can't see it behind me, but I have a sign that says family is everything. And it's because I walk into my office and that doesn't change.
Yeah.
So I make my decisions based on them first, right? And I know that makes it easier for me to prioritize them. That's why work-life balance is so important. It's not because I don't want to drive to work or because I want time off. It's because I want time around my kids. I
Yeah.
want to work really hard, and then I want to jump in my car and drive over and coach my son's football team or soccer team, or
Sure.
make
Yeah.
sure I can get my daughter has swim practice tonight. And I want to be able to take her to that and do those things. My wife is incredible, and she gets them to most of the things during the day when they're, especially in the summertime. And
Yeah.
um, but I want those experiences too, and
Yeah.
she's great about trying to find ways for me after work to do those things, and I want to be able to do them.
Yeah.
So that's so important. But for me, it's alignment.
I
It's
love
knowing
that.
who you are and not sacrificing that for things that just aren't worth it.
Yeah.
They're
Fantastic.
just not worth it.
No, that's a
Fantastic.
great lesson to leave our listeners on is remembering that. So I really appreciate that, Brian. I have really enjoyed getting to know you even a little bit more.
Likewise,
It's
this has
yeah,
been
it's so
great.
cool. It's funny
Thank you,
how you
Brian.
meet people throughout your life and throughout your career where there's just something like you're like, well, I just connect with this person,
Mhm.
and I'm a very introverted person, and so for me in those events, like trying to do that social networking and everything. So when I meet someone that I'm like, wow, there's something about the connection where you're like, yeah, to your point, these are my people. These I can relate. We have commonalities that make you want to dive in and get to know the person
What
even
one of the
more.
best so, I'll end with this. One of the best, icebreakers I've heard in a while was an event we were at, and they were asking people what shows they're binging. And
Yeah, that was good.
I've never seen a group of people or an entire room light up
Right?
when they get asked different television shows or books to share with people that
Yeah.
they love. I mean, you could ask them anything, but you ask them that, and they
Yeah.
are fully engaged. It doesn't matter, introvert, extrovert,
That's so
whatever.
true.
That's
That
that's
is.
their thing. So,
It's
That
funny,
was
Brian,
funny.
you
That
say
was a
that.
good one.
And there's a story I'll tell you guys too to just get in there a little bit on that one. I having 3 kids and being just a little further along than you, Brian, in their development and trying to be a part of it all. Every one of their friends gets in my car with 2 questions. If I'm ever driving a kid anywhere, the kid has to answer what is his favorite color and what is his
mhm.
favorite song. And the
Oh,
icebreaker
I
for
nice.
love that.
them these days, when it's not radio stations like when we were kids and all that, they don't know what song it is. I start it with, well, my favorite song is Happy Birthday. And it just makes them feel a little bit easier, a little bit happier about what's happening next.
Yeah,
and
I
it
like
gets me
that.
out of
But
my
you can't
black
be
and
sad
white.
when you hear somebody sing
No.
happy birthday.
You can't.
Right,
That's
right.
right. Exactly. No,
So-
that's
That's great.
perfect. I
All right.
love it.
Anyway,
Well,
thank you
thanks
for being here,
again.
Brian. It's been a real
thanks,
pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of An Unconventional Guide to Success. If you want to learn more about Brian Chidester, you can follow him on LinkedIn. His profile is in the show notes. An Unconventional Guide to Success is an inspirational, motivated series hosted by Scott Montgomery and Linda Misegadis, recorded on Riverside.fm. Music, editing, and production by Logan Misegadis. Check out Scott Montgomery's new book, How Did You Get Here, and all the helpful related materials at www.howdidyougethere.com. Thank you for joining us on our journey. If you would like to reach out to us, our contact information is in the show notes.